Kia ora and welcome to the next episode of the Impact Collective podcast, where we start discussing everything from community engagement, co-design and consultation. We're joined today by Steph Lewis, who is the Labour MP for Whanganui, Stratford and South Taranaki.
Well done, yes. Kia ora, and thanks for having me on here, Steve. It's really good to come and catch up. Awesome. So I'm Steph, I'm the MP for Whanganui. This is my third year as a Member of Parliament. Awesome. And our electorate starts from the Whanganui River. Yes. We go up through Whanganui, through South Taranaki to just north of Stratford. We go a wee way inland to National Park and then sort of follow the Whanganui Awa down, cut across to the Whanganui River and then obviously all the way out to the coast as well. Yeah,
big district.
It is a big district,
awesome.
But I'm really privileged to have been the MP for the last 3 years. I'm also a mum. I've got two small children, my son Flynn, who's 1, and my daughter Scarlett, who's 5, and just started school.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Part of what we go through when we're having discussions on this podcast is we're really intrigued about the way that organisations, Crown agencies, iwi, engage with members of their community. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm a through and through Facebook stalker, but I stalked your page, not going to lie. And one of the things that I found really interesting, and I think this ties back to your childhood experiences, you've recently been out to the prison.
Yeah.
And you were out there and you were engaging around the prison system and the kaupapa that they're doing out there just outside of Whanganui. Mm-hmm. How was that for you in terms of getting out there face to face, pressing the flesh, for want of a better terminology, back out in the community, as opposed to some of the entities and organisations which do it from afar?
So in my role, I tell people that my role is twofold. So when I'm here in our electorate, my role is to listen, and I don't believe I can fill that role if I'm sitting behind a desk. Yep. So it's really important for me to get out from my office and to go out and engage with the community, and there's a number of ways that I do that. So I hold office drop-ins, I go out and have office pop-ups at libraries or cafes. I try and do a market stall once a month, so as if somebody's working during the week and can't get time off work to come and see me, then I can catch up with them on a weekend day. And then of course I do visits to businesses and agencies in town locally. So this morning, for example, I was out at Whanganui Enterprises, hearing about their journey, chatting about some of the challenges that they're facing at the moment. And then this afternoon I'm going to CCS Disability to have a chat with them and hear about the support that they need to support people with disabilities living in our community. So it's really important to me to be out and about. Yeah. The prison visit was also quite a personal one, because I grew up there. I lived out the prison village till I was about 9, and my earliest childhood memory is of a prison escape. Oh.
Gosh, okay.
Yeah, I can still hear the sound of the footsteps as they jumped over our back fence and ran across our backyard, jumped the back fence and into the farmland behind the house we were living at the prison village there.
Caught, I'm presuming.
They were, yeah.
Not still on the run.
Not still on the run, no.
So you mentioned within your portfolio, so I just want to tease that out a little bit. Yeah. What are the portfolios that you're sitting with at the moment?
So down in Parliament, I am the chair of the Primary Production Select Committee, so that's made up of members from across the House. So we've got Labour representation, National and ACT. Sometimes we get the Green Party also come in and sit in on particular topics as well. I also chair Labour's Rural Caucus as well. We have quite a number of rural and regional MPs, so we have some quite robust discussions, from about farm planning, about waterways, all the way through to rural connectivity.
So when we've gone along and we've had a look at some of the data that's come through from us, we've actually really struggled from time to time to get good, robust quality data around life on land, life below water and climate action. Yeah. So massive focus for rural communities at the moment, being around the carbon accreditation system, shifting the balance of dry farms towards some forestry. What's the sense and the feeling that you get in your particular rohi when you're discussing this with farmers around the gut feeling of, is it enough and are we moving fast enough, as opposed to feeling like they're not doing that?
So they are. So there's huge amounts of work that farmers are doing to become more sustainable, to reduce their emissions profiles. Lots of great examples of riparian planting, for example. And particularly up in Taranaki, we're seeing that riparian planting that was started when I was at Waverley Primary School up there, now maturing, and it's really cool to drive along and see. But also there's a big conversation around freshwater quality at the moment, and wetlands in particular. So they, I guess, look, I'm no expert in wetlands, but they kind of act a little bit like a liver in our body, and they absorb some of, the nasty runoff perhaps, and then out the other end flows healthier water, but it increases biodiversity as well. And so there is a big focus on bringing back and saving and protecting the wetlands that we've got. In terms of the conversion on farm into forestry, one of the things that I strongly advocate for is that what we're not doing is converting our productive food producing land into forestry to become carbon sinks, or it's really important, I believe, that our high quality food production land stays as food production land. But there is a space as well, we've brought in those integrated farm plans. There is a space for farmers to look at, and they are doing it, the different parts of their farm. Is that an erosion prone part of their farm? Should they plant it in natives and fence it off? So there is a lot of work that we're doing around, soil mapping, water quality stuff, and then having a look at whether, some parts just aren't suitable to be stocked. And so if they are not suitable for being stocked, or for having stock on them, what else can we do? And there's heaps of innovation happening in that space. Hemp is a crop that is showing real promise, and for quite a few different diverse uses. So I've heard of a company that's looking at using hemp, for example, to do SIP panel building. So using the husks to produce the panels, and then the leaves and stuff, mulching them down to produce the insulation fibre.
Wow. So one of the things that has been reflected on in a previous podcast, I sat down and had a chat with Gareth Hughes, and it was just as the Cyclone Gabrielle stuff was going through, and some of the transition with forestry had a massive impact up in Tairāwhiti, for example.
Yeah, it did.
So with the 1 billion trees policy that was in place, where the perpetual nature of that was to enable further carbon sinking and bringing together, has there been a thought process around bringing together the farmers in order to encourage the more native planting as opposed to pine, like radiata pine, which seems to...
So we haven't, as a government, been encouraging planting in pine necessarily. The philosophy that we have been trying to encourage is right tree, right place. So, we saw in the East Coast all really steep erosion-prone land that was planted in pines in the 80s after Cyclone Bowler, I think it was. And we've seen now, the images of what happened after Cyclone Gabrielle. We know now that you don't plant high erosion-prone land in pines because they have a short lifespan. They don't have the rooting systems aren't as deep, so it's not going to help your erosion-prone soil. But natives, slower growing, but longer lifespans, better root systems, so better for those more erosion-prone soils. So that's why we've had that philosophy around right tree, right place. Is this are you planting forestry for production, or are you planting it for a carbon sink? If it's a carbon sink, then I think you should look more towards natives,
longer term,
because they're slower growing, but it is that longer term in terms of especially those highly erosion prone soils, you have a better outcome. And I think the forestry sector's having to have a big conversation at the moment around social licence and whether they still have social licence to operate. I think they've heard the message from people that they don't have social licence to continue operating the way they have been. And that's part of the reason why we did the land use inquiry immediately following the cyclone.
Do you think that there's going to be flow-on effects and impacts within the rural sector as a result of these land transformations to go more into the carbon sinking? I read recently around Ruapehu district and them having a large amount of land that's been converted into to a carbon sink, for want of a better terminology. Given the fact that your rohe in particular is hugely rural, what's the gut sense of where does that go for them?
So again, what we don't want to see, and what I will never encourage, is productive farmland to be planted in forestry. But we're doing these integrated farm plans, farm mapping, and that's an opportunity for farmers. And look, a lot of them, Steve, are already doing it. Sitting down and going, where is my best production land in terms of whether it's sheep, beef, dairy, and where am I getting the best bang for my buck in terms of cropping. And there's so much innovation happening. So there's the dairy trust farms up in South Taranaki, for example, and they have a couple of different farms where they're doing different trials. So and they are doing their trials based on what the average dairy farm in South Taranaki looks like, so 3.4 cows per hectare, and they're trying to reflect the inputs, so as any of the results and the outcomes that they get could be replicated by the average farmer. So they're looking at using different grasses, plantain for example, and seeing what difference that has on the methane output of cows, and they're measuring those results and trialling different feed supplements as well. They're trialling different technologies like Halter, which is a collar that the cows can wear. It measures their rumination, so it can tell you whether a cow's ruminating properly or not. You can do away with needing to use electric fences because you can train them through Halter. They use sound and vibration to guide the cow. So you can actually bring the cow into the milking shed without the need for the farmer or worker to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. But it also means that in the event where we've got severe weather event, heavy rain, that you can move them away from those floodplains without having to go and also put yourself or your workers in danger. But what it also does is you can see where the cows are spending most of their time in the paddock, and so if that's where they're spending most of their time, then it's also where they're urinating, and so there's likely to be a higher concentration of nitrogen in that area of the paddock. So that information then informs the amount of fertiliser that a farmer needs to use on their paddocks. So they can then reduce their fertiliser input, which then obviously reduces the potential runoff into waterways. So the dairy trust farms are doing a lot of research into that and to then showcase their outcomes in a way that hopefully other farmers are then able to take up those ideas and what's worked and adapt it for their farm, because we know one size doesn't fit all, and then run with that. They're also just started a trial on one farm to move to zero emissions, so they've brought in e-bikes, so e-motorbikes as well, and so I'm really keen to follow how they get on with that trial.
So part of that transition, and we had a brief conversation before we started this around some of the other research and technology changes which are coming down. What you mentioned around Milky, which is cool. How in the likely event that climate change is going to have more and more severe weather impacts on our country, what does this look like for our power generation and the reliance on electric charging networks? So the reason that I bring this up is that I was speaking to a farmer over in Hawke's Bay and had done exactly what you were mentioning around changing towards electric motorbikes and all of that, and then the floods hit. And all of a sudden had to go back to using diesel generators and having to borrow the next door neighbour's truck in order to be able to get around. What are we doing, you may or may not know, across Aotearoa, which is starting to look at that more reliability, durability and sustainability of that electrification network if we are going down that path?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've done through the budget this year is put up a fund for infrastructure resilience. Because we do have an infrastructure deficit at the moment. I mean, take our own port here in Whanganui, for example. Decades where it was literally crumbling into the sea. Yet without that north and south mole, Castle Cliff is prone to coastal erosion. And if we continue to let those deteriorate, then Castle Cliff as we know it would have been in trouble. That's right. So we do have to continue to invest in our infrastructure, but not just to build more to make up for the deficit, but build more resilient infrastructure and networks as well. But there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening in this space. So, we're all familiar with the wind farms over the other side of Palmerston North. We've got the Waipipi wind farm between Waverley and Patea now. There's a lot of talk as well about the potential for offshore wind off the coast of Taranaki. So I have had pitches from a few companies who are really, really interested in progressing that work. It's an issue that Venture Taranaki have also been taking a lead in, looking into the viability of it. Then you've also got hydrogen, green hydrogen coming to the fore as well. So Haringa Energy, which is a New Plymouth-based company looking into hydrogen, have partnered with Balance Agri-Nutrients in their Kapuni plant. And so what they're looking at doing there is installing a big windmill, which would then generate electricity, which they would then use to produce hydrogen, which would also then produce green urea. So Haringa Energy are also talking to the long haul trucking fleets and looking at how do we establish a hydrogen fueling network throughout the country to make hydrogen a viable option as well. And that technology is there. It's being used overseas. So we need companies like Haringa to come in and shake things up here in Aotearoa and get things moving here. And we've got there is financial support from the government to do some of that big transformation work. And even in the primary sector, we've got the Sustainable Food and Fibre Futures Fund, and then we've got funds to support the transition away from, say, if it's Fonterra using coal boilers into more sustainable heating and cooling methods for their processing.
It seems like within New Zealand we're needing to press play more on the design, the future production value in terms of what it is that we see coming down the pipeline. And you've mentioned hydrogen, for example, is going to be an absolute game changer for our long haul fleets if it does indeed end up with a network that would enable that, would effectively revolutionise our trucking industry almost overnight if we had the ability to implement that. What are some of the other things that you're seeing coming down the pipelines at the moment in terms of nuanced approaches to what the community would want to be involved in immediately.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about the rural network. You've mentioned the north and south mole at the Whanganui port. What is happening down there at the moment? What's the end game with the Whanganui port? Are we going to start seeing more production coming in and out? And
yeah, well, the idea with the revitalisation of the port is that it would enable it to become a viable working port again, and then that would attract more business and industry to the area. QS, for example, with the port revitalisation, will be able to build a new boat lift, which will enable them to build bigger boats right here in Whanganui, and there is demand for it. I am aware of other businesses that were said, if you build the port, would be interested in coming. So there is, employment opportunities there. Obviously, there's the as part of that port project, there's the employment precinct where they are supporting individuals to take up some of those roles in the port development and in jobs adjacent to the port. So that's, I've talked to lots of people who remember it when it was a working port, and so it's good to see something happening there, but at the very least to have that protection for the people of Castlecliff and that whole suburb with the rebuild of the North Mole.
Awesome. When we went along and the team undertook the Whanganui Equity and Wellbeing Profile, a couple of things that continuously came out was around the education and employment opportunities here in the Whanganui in particular.
Yeah.
Some of the things that they were concerned about is around education opportunities, in particular for tertiary settings, with almost a brain drain from Whanganui across to Manawatu, Palmerston North for the likes of Massey University, or down to Wellington for Victoria. But one of the things that they said was most interesting around here is the fact that there's a heavy manufacturing presence here, which is awesome with the precinct just outside of Gonville. But the other thing they said is that there's an increasing niche boutique type shopping experience that's coming to Whanganui.
Yeah.
Is that something that's been prioritised here in Whanganui in particular, or is it just something that's kind of naturally started shaping up?
I think it's, Whanganui and Partners does a bit of work in terms of attracting some of those businesses and working with them to relocate or open up a shop here and get staff on board. But I think as well, we've seen a real rejuvenation here in Whanganui over the last few years, and I think that's really being led by our arts community. I think back to what sort of Druze Ave, Taupoki looked like when I was a kid growing up here, and it looks completely different now. That part of the hour where the markets are every Saturday morning, it's completely changed, and it's created a real community and vibrancy that is bringing new people to Whanganui who might never have previously come, and they get here and they'd fall in love. And I love hearing about that when I'm down at the market. A lot of the people I talk to are people who've come from out of town, and they've said, oh my gosh, I had no idea how beautiful it is here and how much there is here. And then they talk about all the different eateries they've been to, the cafes and the restaurants and the art galleries and the shopping as well. And so, we're really offering that full package of experiences now, which I think is amazing. It's incredible.
If you had the ability to define Whanganui and what it would look like and be shaped up as into the future, what would that kind of look like? Is it an artsy type vibe? Is it more manufacturing the traditional stuff? Is it little bits of everything? Is there a particular niche that you could see that could come in?
Oh, I definitely want to continue to support our arts community. They have done and given so much to our community, especially in terms of that vibrancy. You know, you think of the likes of Whanganui Walls, New Zealand Glassworks,
Yep.
Katie Brown. You know, just a couple off the top of my head, the whole open artist studios, you know, and the thousands of people who come to town for that every year. Vintage Weekend is now an event that is on the national events calendar, and there again thousands of people come to that. But absolutely, like in terms of our employment opportunities, then I think, you know, we really still need to encourage that manufacturing as well. And one thing I love about our industry here in Whanganui, you know, when you go out along Heads Road, there's gates and the fences between the different businesses, because they're all going between each other to borrow tools or welders, and they all get in and support each other, and there's that real community feel, and I think that's really special, and that is something that I believe sets Whanganui apart. Awesome.
Let's go with Head Roads at the moment. Massive expansion that occurred out there, huge amount. Really did lead an almost rejuvenation of that area. Consequently, massive expansion into Springvale, all of those areas just exploding with popularity. There was a significant period of time where the population decline in Whanganui was a thing.
Yeah.
Are we seeing the change and the transformation that's required in order to bring people home again?
We are. We are, absolutely. So, you know, there are a few pivotal moments, and when I look back over my life, you know, what set me on my journey to become an MP, and one of those was, I guess, the aftermath of the global financial crisis. And when I finished university and came back here, I had 2 degrees, and the only job I could get was part-time out at the Waitotara Dairy, casual. I, you know, went into work and income, and they we don't have any jobs for someone like you. So I went down to Claw and said, look, will you take me as a volunteer? And ended up getting 3 days paid work a week. So, you know, that was some really tough times, and some of the families that I'd grown up with were doing it really hard then. And I remember as well, one of the news reporters coming through town and calling us a zombie town because we'd had years of population decline. We'd had shop after shop on Victoria Ave close down and sit empty. And, you know, when you look at us now versus when you look at us back then, we have turned a massive corner, and everybody I talk to has felt that shift. You know, we've got a lot of people who got priced out of housing in the big urban centres who were able to cash up their lives in Auckland or Wellington, wherever, and come here where they've fallen in love with the pace of life. It was a more affordable lifestyle for them, and so we are seeing, I think, a real rejuvenation here and population growth in Whanganui.
Is there an opportunity for Whanganui to be a hub of remotes? I know that sounds weird, but where it is digitally capable and enabled for that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we were one of the first cities in the country to get fibre rollout. So I think there is definitely potential. And, you know, I think if there's one of the silver linings to COVID is that, you know, we were able to see that the technology is there, the resources are there, and, you know, businesses aren't going to, and companies aren't going to fall over if people do work from home. So I do think we have the potential to become, you know, a hybrid working model here, and, you know, I know a few people who work part-time here, and then either go part-time up to Auckland or part-time down to Wellington, and then when they're here, they're remoting in.
Is that expanded across your entire region, whether you think there's that potential and possibility, or primarily in the Whanganui being a bit of a hub?
Yeah, I'd say probably more primarily in Whanganui. I mean, when I look to, Waverley, Paratia, Hawera, Eltham, Stretford, the jobs that are in those areas are more geared towards a lot of them supporting those primary industry roles. So, your engineering roles to support the likes of Fonterra and on-farm equipment that's needed. But I do know a few people who are moving into those areas from out of town and doing that work from home, that remote working. Up in Hawera, we've just had a co-working shared space open up where you can go and hire a desk or a meeting room and work there. So, there obviously is that demand for that remote working ability, and to have that shared co-working space. So it's really cool to see that more people are thinking outside the box, and they can have the best of both worlds. You can have the lifestyle while also doing your Auckland job or your Wellington job.
Do you feel like there is a real sense of community in these rural populations in particular still?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
We started. This was more reflected in the Rangatike actually when we were engaging with the likes of the Rural Women's Network and a number of the farmers that were over there, where they were experiencing increased sense of loneliness really. Is there a way that through your engagement that you've had with the community that they've started identifying key areas where they can help and support that type of mahi, the bringing together of those tight-knit communities again?
Yeah, and I think, we've gone through a period of huge change in quite a short space of time. And a lot of people, I think, for a while they were, feeling fear about going out in public again. For farmers in particular, you just work all the hours that the sun comes up. So trying to build in that social aspect and stuff can be challenging. But I think it is really important that we do get out and have those community events again. So I was recently at the Farm Environment Trust Awards down in Wellington, where they did their national showcase of farms that had been regional farm environment winners from their respective regions. And one of the farmers who'd won from another region had said one of the things that, partly for well-being, but also for that social aspect that had implemented, was a system where all of the local, or network where all of the local farmers would get together every now and again, and they'd actually go and do a tour of each other's farms.
Oh, wow. Yep.
So you've got the social aspect there, but you're also then sharing learning and knowledge, and so you can go, oh, you're doing that here on your farm, why are you doing it that way, and what have the outcomes been, and then you can take some of that stuff back and look at whether or not that would work on your farm. And so for sharing those stories around sustainability and emissions reduction, I think that's a really cool idea, but that also helps overcome that loneliness and isolation feelings that you talked about.
So the learnings that they're able to see and achieve is something that we at the Impact Collective have been quite keen on understanding. Part of the reason why we go in and work on the basis of verbatim narratives. What are some of the ways that communities in particular are able to feed those types of learnings back into a central environment so that they do get more leverage, they do get more visibility and potentially funded? Yeah.
And so, Rural Support Trust does a lot of that work, and some of those other advocacy agencies. So, sticking with the rural theme, you've got your feed farmers, beef and lamb, in your Farm Environment Trust. So they all do events for their members. Rural Support, I know, are quite keen to support push as well that social aspect.
Yeah.
So I know Rural Support up in Taranaki, for example, they have had a program of events where they go around and put on events at the little rural community halls, for example. And I, as the local MP, have tried really hard to establish relationships with a lot of those agencies, and so farmers say I might not be able to get to talk to every single farmer. I do my best to get around as many as possible, but then they'll talk to their representative bodies, and then I try and make sure that I've got a good link in with them, and so they'll quite often pass feedback on to me, which when I'm doing my listening part of the role in the electorate, then we move to the flip side of the other half of my role, which is the talking. So that's where I go down to Wellington and I share those stories, and I push for policy changes that are going to benefit people on the ground here in our electorate. So when I said way back at the start that my role's twofold, here in the electorate it's listening, down in Wellington it's talking, and it's being that squeaky wheel that ministers like, oh, you again. But that's what I'm there for. And as much as I would love to spend all my time on the ground here in Whanganui and in the electorate, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I did that, because then I wouldn't be going down and trying to influence that policy and changes that are actually going to make a difference for people here.
So let's go there. What does the day in the life of Steph as the MP look like?
So we'll take a Parliament week. So I've just had a Parliament week. So spend Monday here in the electorate, doing going out doing visits like this, and then on a Monday night I'll drive down to Wellington. Tuesday morning in Parliament around 8 o'clock in the morning. We have a quick catch up in the morning to go through what the plan in the House, which is what we call the debating chamber, will be. Then on a Tuesday morning I've lots of committees. So which is again where we have those conversations around, we feedback what we've heard in the electorate, but we also have those conversations around policy. So I've got those committee meetings. Then we go into caucus meeting, which is where all of our Labour MPs come together. And again, another opportunity for me to feedback those stories that I've heard from the electorate. Also try and catch up and have a quick chat with some of those ministers where I need to get some more information or pass on particular feedback, or I've got a question about something. My next meeting on a Tuesday is having a meeting where we set the agenda for the Primary Production Committee, which meets on a Thursday morning. So the clerks of the committee who support us, then once I've agreed to the agenda, they'll go away and they'll prepare all of the material that we need to read to support our ability to participate in the meeting on the Thursday, and then usually that goes up on a Tuesday evening, and so we've got Wednesday to do that reading. 2 o'clock we're in the House for question time, which is the part that typically makes it on the 6 o'clock news. I stay in the House until 4:30, so my House duty, we have House duty, so we're not, that's why, sometimes you'll turn on Parliament TV and there's no one there. That's because we're all off doing select committees and other meetings, and so we have a roster, so there's always someone in the House, and those are the individuals that you'll see, especially late at night, if you're tuning in because you can't sleep. And so then I will go and get ready after House duty for Rural Caucus. So I chair our Rural Caucus on a Tuesday night. I'll try and start fitting in my select committee readings. On a Wednesday morning, usually I've got sort of my time to catch up on emails, on constituent work that my team from the electorate offices might have asked for help with and input on, and quite often recently I'll also get subbed into another select committee just to cover someone who's off sick or gone to an electorate event or whatever, and then on again we go through question time on a Wednesday, then regulations review select committee, which is another select committee I'm on, and then we've got meetings on Wednesday night, which is again when I catch up with our primary production committee, select committee team. So we just prepare as the Labour MPs on it for the meeting the following morning. And again, primary production in the morning. So on a Monday and Tuesday, we'll go from 8 till 10, 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. We have a break at sort of 1 till 2 p.m. for lunch, and then a break 6 till 7 for dinner. And then otherwise it's nose to the grind. And then Thursday we'll go from 8 till 5. And then once the bell goes, yes, we've got bells in Parliament. It's kind of a bit like school. Then I try and get out on the road back to Whanganui as quickly as I can. So I've got a little flat near Parliament, so I whip back there, pack up, and then do the drive home. And then usually on a Friday I'd be in Taranaki. So I have to get up early and then drive up there and do a full day's worth of engagements up there. So that's...
And then, so that's Parliament Week?
That's Parliament Week, yeah.
And how often are you doing Parliament Week?
So Parliament Week, we sit sort of in 2 to 3 week blocks. So this block that we've just started this week is a 2-week block. So I'll do that for this week and then next week. And then I've got a week back in the electorate. And then I go back to Parliament for 3 weeks. And then I'll be back here for the school holidays.
So huge amount of time for you during that week in particular where you're out of the region. How do you manage and maintain because around community engagement? Because it's that authentic nature, it's that trust building that's going to be critical for the success of that.
People want to see their MP in person. I am lucky. I've got a really good team in my office here in Whanganui and up in Hawera as well. And when I can't be here, they're sort of my eyes and my ears on the ground, and they start building that rapport and information gathering with constituents who come in, and they're on the phone or messaging me constantly throughout the day. Whenever I get a gap, I'll look at my phone and there's usually somewhere around 11 messages. And we'll sort of work through the messages and any questions they've got. But also Zoom, it's become quite a powerful tool that we've just embedded into our everyday lifestyle now, I guess. And so I'm really lucky that with the increased use of Zoom, it allows me to attend some events back here in the electorate that I might not otherwise be able to do because I'm down in Parliament.
Is there a better or easier way for your constituents to get in contact with you? Like, what's the way that they can?
I've got my cell phone number on the internet.
True.
I was heading out the door the other day to go and pick up my daughter from her first day of school, and the phone rang, and I was like, do I have time to answer this or not? And it was a constituent wanting to have a chat about eggs.
The price, I hope.
Or the lack of availability at the moment, Yeah,
it's pretty bad, I must admit. Awesome. We've been able to cover off a lot today, and it's been awesome to hear a lot of the innovation that's happening, because I don't think there's enough being said.
That's right,
and hearing it, especially in the rural sector. I feel like they get a bad rap.
They do.
And
unfairly so in many cases.
Exactly. They're really, really salt of the earth people. And a lot of them are doing the right thing in terms of that riparian planting, in terms of supporting climate change actions and looking at new ways of working things. Exactly. We've managed to have a quick chat about what the day in the life of an MP is, and I think you've confirmed for me that I don't want to become a politician. That's fine. We'll leave it to the people who are truly inspired by that type of lifestyle. It's been awesome to hear how it is that you do go along and hold even people within your own party to account in terms of what is right now for the people that are inside Whanganui across the Stratford. So it's really cool to get a bit of a flavour of what does that actually look like. So thank you very much, Lee. The last question that we asked, I know, and it's a humdinger too. Every podcast guests, we go along and we ask them the same question, which is, if you could have a billboard anywhere in the world which billions of eyes would see, what would the message that you'd put onto that billboard that you'd want everybody to hear or see?
Ooh. Well, as long as it doesn't have my face on it.
No. It doesn't have to have pictures. It can literally just be a quote. Could be even be your favourite quote out of a book. But what would you want everybody to know?
I think it would be Whanganui, the best place to be.
Oh, anybody would think you're the MP for Whanganui.
I love it though, I always imagined when I left Whanganui, because I was one of those young people who left, went down to Vic, went to university. I was like, yeah, I'm going to, it's a big lifestyle, I'm going to be a big city girl now, but actually I missed home.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is honestly no place I would rather be, and no place I would rather raise my kids.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today. Tune in next week for the next episode of the Impact Collective podcast. Kia ora.